Montana Territory, July 1881, the bridge gave way with a groan like the earth was splitting open, and then the world turned sideways. Francesca Rylan had only enough time to scream before the wagon beneath her pitched, the wood shattering as one of the support beams cracked clean through. Her body slammed hard against the side rails, splinters tearing at her dress. The horses screamed, yanking against their reins, but it was too late. The bridge folded, the wagon dropped, and the world went black. When she came to, she was pinned. Dust filled her mouth. Something heavy timber, maybe part of the wagon wheel, pressed down hard across her legs. She could not feel her left foot. Blood trickled down her forehead, warm and steady. Above her, the afternoon sun glared through the torn planks of the broken bridge. The scent of cedar sap and broken earth filled the air. Her hands trembled as she tried to shove the timber off, but it would not budge. Panic clawed at her throat. "Help!" Her voice cracked. "Nothing," she screamed again, louder. "Help! Somebody, please!" A shadow moved above the edge of the creek bed, a silhouette against the sun. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, then a voice called down, low and steady. "Do not move, I am coming." Boots skidded down the slope. Dust kicked up. A man dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already reaching for the beam across her legs. He wore a weathered trail coat and a broad-brimmed hat, his shirt damp with sweat and dust. His hair was dark brown, curling at the edges, and his eyes sharp, clear, met hers with a weight that calmed her chest. "I am Elijah Merrick," he said. "You are going to be all right." Francesca's voice came out hoarse. I cannot move my legs." He pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck, feeling her pulse. "You are alive, that is what matters right now." "I was crossing to get to Fort Benton," she whispered. "I was heading north, my sister's boy is sick. I had medicine, I saw the crate, it flew clean off." "I will get it, please," she whispered, and then the tears came. He touched her shoulder gently. "First, I am getting you out of this." He rose and tried lifting the beam, but it did not budge. He gritted his teeth and tried again, digging his boots into the dry earth, straining until his arms shook. Still nothing. Elijah crouched beside her again. "You are stuck deep. That wheel is wedged under a boulder." She closed her eyes, pain flashing fresh through her. "You should go. Ride to Fort Benton. Get a doctor." His voice was quiet but firm. "I am not leaving you here." She opened her eyes. "You do not even know me." "I do not care. You are alive. That is enough." He stood again, scanning the wreckage. Then he moved quick, steady, quiet, and began pulling pieces free. Francesca watched him work, sweat running down his neck, jaw locked, muscles straining as he broke apart what remained of the wagon. He moved with purpose, with fury, like he could not stand the thought of her trapped another minute. Every time she winced, every time she gasped, he paused and looked at her. "You still with me?" he asked. She nodded. "Francesca, I am Francesca Rylan." His lips twitched, something like relief softening his face. "Francesca," he said, like he wanted to remember the sound. "You are going to be free soon." He vanished up the slope for a moment and came back with a thick length of rope and a long branch. He wedged the branch beneath the timber, tied off the rope to a nearby boulder, and braced himself. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. He heaved, the beam shifted. She screamed as the pressure lifted, fire shooting through her legs. But then the weight was gone. She lay there, gasping, tears streaking her face. Elijah dropped the beam aside and dropped to his knees beside her. He touched her leg gently. "It is not crushed." "Bad sprain, maybe worse, but not crushed." He slid his arms beneath her. She stiffened. "I have to move you," he said. "Just lean into me." She nodded, and he lifted her like she weighed nothing. She buried her face against his neck, breathing through the pain, smelling sweat and dirt and leather. He carried her up the slope, slow, careful, every step steady. At the top, he set her down on a folded bedroll beside his horse. He pulled water from his canteen, held it to her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her, and something passed between them, quiet, real. "Someone would have helped," she said. "I was not going to risk waiting," Elijah replied. "You screamed like you meant it." She laughed a little, even through the ache. "I did." He pulled a blanket over her legs, then turned back toward the wreckage. "I will get the medicine," he said. You do not have to. I want to. He disappeared down the slope again. Francesca watched the sky turn gold with evening, the light soft on the hills. When he returned, he had the cracked crate in his arms. Still sealed, he said, crouching beside her. You are lucky. No. I am lucky you were there, she said. He met her eyes again, and something stayed there this time, something warm. I was riding through to Helena, he said. Thought I would make camp near the creek. I guess I was meant to see that bridge fall. She reached out, touched his hand. He did not pull away. I do not know how to thank you. You do not have to, he said, but I am not leaving you alone out here, not until you are safe. She looked down at their hands, his fingers closing gently around hers. I would like that, she said quietly. He smiled, soft and sure. Then let us get you to Fort Benton. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Francesca knew something had shifted for good. They rode out at first light, the sky still pale with the hush of morning. Elijah had fashioned a makeshift splint for Francesca's leg, using a pine slat and strips torn from the hem of her dress. He'd wrapped her ankle tight, then helped her up into the saddle, careful not to jar her. His horse, a steady dun gelding with a scar down one flank, took her weight without complaint. Elijah led on foot, reins in one hand, rifle slung across his back. The trail toward Fort Benton ran narrow along the river, the ground soft from recent rains. They moved slow. Francesca held tight to the saddle horn, her jaw clenched whenever the horse shifted beneath her. She didn't make a sound, but Elijah noticed the way her hands gripped tighter near each rut. You ever been through this stretch before? She asked, voice dry from the trail and pain. Twice, he said. Once to deliver cattle up from Miles City. Second time I was just passing through. You always passing through, he glanced back at her. Lately, she nodded, eyes on the horizon. I used to think I'd see more of the world. Then I married a man who never wanted to leave Cascade. He didn't ask what happened to the man. The way she said it told enough. She shifted in the saddle, wincing. I was 19 when I left Boston, thought I knew everything. First winter out here, I cried every time I went to the well. You stayed, he said. I did. They moved in silence for a stretch. Birds flitted low through the grasses and cottonwood seeds floated like snow. The trail widened near a bend in the river and Elijah halted. We'll stop here a moment, he said. Let the horse rest. She eased herself down with his help, teeth clenched as her boot grazed the ground. He spread a blanket beneath a cluster of birch trees and helped her sit. She leaned back against the trunk. You always this good at taking care of strangers. He unslung a small tin pot from his saddlebag and moved toward the river. Only the ones who fall through bridges. She laughed, brief and dry, as he filled the pot and set it over a fire he'd built with practiced ease. When the water boiled, he dropped in dried chamomile and a pinch of willow bark. He handed her the tin cup. It won't fix the pain, but it'll dull it some. She took it, fingers brushing his. You know a lot for a man who says he's just passing through. He sat across from her, knees bent, arms resting across them. My mother was a midwife, learned a fair bit watching her. She died when I was 20. After that, I started drifting. She sipped the tea, watching him over the rim. You don't talk like a man with no roots, he shrugged. I had roots once, just don't know where they are anymore. She looked toward the river, her voice softer. My sister's boy has a fever that won't break. That's why I took the wagon out. No one else in Cascade had the tincture I needed. I'd been saving for months. He said nothing, only watched her face as she spoke. I was scared when I saw that bridge give, not just of dying, but of not getting to him in time, she said. You will, he said. We'll be there by tomorrow. The light caught the curve of her cheek and she turned her face toward the warmth. You're sure? I don't say things I don't mean. She met his eyes, steady now. Neither do I. He stood and reached for the packs. We'll ride another hour, then camp. I know a spot near some cottonwoods. Clean water, good cover. She nodded and handed him the empty tin cup. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A man who'd see a broken bridge and ride the other way. He looked down at her, eyes quiet. I reckon you don't know me yet. I'm starting to, she said, and something in the way she said it settled between them like the hush before a storm, not dangerous but certain. Elijah turned away first, leading the horse closer. When he helped her up again, she didn't flinch at his touch. They rode on. The day warmed, the river sang beneath the trees, and though Francesca's legs still ached, the pain no longer felt like the only thing she carried. By the time the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, the trail had narrowed into a ridge path, steep on one side with the Missouri River winding far below. Elijah helped Francesca dismount beneath a stand of juniper, the sky turning dusky blue above them. He eased her down beside a flat rock and unrolled the blanket, this time without a word. She didn't ask for help, but he gave it anyway, careful not to meet her eyes too long. Once she settled, he led the horse to a shallow stream nearby, loosening the bridle and letting the gelding drink. Francesca watched him from where she sat, one hand resting on her bandaged leg. There was a stillness to him that didn't match the way he moved, like a man who had weathered too much noise and now preferred the quiet. "You ever think about settling?" she asked as he returned, carrying his saddlebag. "Once," he said, crouching to build a fire. "Didn't take." "Where?" He struck the flint. "South of the Gallatin Range, little cabin with a sod roof and a stove that never drew right. I put up fence posts for a year, but come spring, the frost pulled him straight back out." After that, I didn't see the point. She shifted, biting back a wince as her leg throbbed. "That sounds like my first year out here. Everything I planted either drowned or withered. I remember thinking, so this is where dreams go to rot." He glanced up at her, the fire catching in his eyes. "But you stayed." "I didn't want to be the girl who ran back east with her tail between her legs." He nodded, feeding kindling into the flames. "Sometimes pride's the only thing that keeps a person upright." The fire caught steady, flickering low. He pulled out a tin of beans and set it on a flat stone near the blaze. The smell of salt and smoke filled the air. Francesca leaned back against the rock, her voice quieter now. "My husband was a schoolteacher. He died 2 winters ago from pneumonia. I buried him behind the church." Elijah didn't speak, only turned the tin with the edge of a stick. "I don't miss him the way I thought I would," she went on. "He was kind, but we weren't close, not the way people expect after 10 years. He passed her the tin when it was warm enough to hold. "You ever let anyone else in after him?" She took it from him slowly. "I didn't see the use. Folks already had ideas about a widow who lived alone. Adding company would have just stirred the pot." He leaned back on his heels, his hat resting beside him now. "Let them think what they want." "That's easy for you to say. You don't answer to anyone." He took a breath, gaze fixed on the fire. "I did once. Had a brother, younger. Took after our ma, bright, restless. He signed on with a freight outfit, said he'd send for me once he made enough. Bandits hit the wagon outside Cheyenne. They never caught them." Francesca's fingers tightened around the tin. "I rode out there," he continued. "Found the site, nothing left but a burnt axle and blood in the dirt." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He nodded once. "I think about him every time I pass a freight wagon. That kind of thing never stops echoing." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling low between them. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the scent of river mud and pine. After a while, he handed her a worn tobacco pouch. "You roll," she raised a brow. "My father smoked. I watched his hands more than I listened to his sermons." They both chuckled, soft and brief. She rolled the paper smooth, her fingers practiced. When she passed it back, their hands brushed. This time, neither of them pulled away. Elijah lit it, took a drag, then held it out. She shook her head. "I like the smell," she said, "but I've never found the taste worth the coughing." He leaned back against the same rock she rested on, his shoulder just brushing hers. "You're different than I expected," she said. He didn't ask how. After a time, she spoke again, almost hesitant. "If you hadn't stopped, I don't know how long I'd have lasted under that bridge." He didn't turn toward her, but his voice was low and sure. "I saw the dust before I heard the crack. I thought it was a rockfall at first. Then I saw the wheel go over the ledge." She looked toward the dark line of the river below. "I thought I was going to die. Not just from the weight, there was this moment when the light narrowed and I realized no one might come at all. He turned his head toward her. I came. She met his gaze, the firelight soft on her cheek. You did. Neither of them said anything more after that. The night deepened, the stars blooming above them in slow clusters. Francesca leaned her head back against the stone and Elijah stayed beside her, steady and quiet. When she drifted into sleep, her breathing even and her hand loose beside his, Elijah didn't move. He only watched the fire fade to coals, the weight of her presence settling into something he hadn't known how to name until now. He wasn't passing through anymore. The morning broke slow and pale, mist rising off the river like threads of breath. Francesca stirred beneath her blanket, the air cool against her cheeks. Her leg pulsed dully, but the worst of the pain had edged off during the night. Elijah was already up, crouched near the fire pit, coaxing a flame from damp kindling with a patience that marked his every movement. You always wake before the sun, she said, voice rough from sleep. He glanced over his shoulder. Old habit. Easier to start before the world gets noisy. She pushed herself upright with care, bracing her palms against the earth. You sleep at all, he nodded toward the saddlebag. Couple hours, leaned against that, dreamed about molasses biscuits if that counts for rest. She smiled, small and genuine. What's stopping you from finding a place with a kitchen again? Maybe nothing, he said, standing to stir the coals. Maybe I just hadn't thought about it in a while. Francesca adjusted her shawl, tugging it tighter across her shoulders. The silence between them felt easier now, like a coat worn in at the seams. She watched him dig a tin from his packed cornmeal wrapped in oilcloth and pour a rough batter into a small skillet. I used to make those biscuits, she said. My sister's recipe called for lard and patience. I had one but not the other. He chuckled low, keeping his eyes on the skillet. Which'd you have? Guess you'll find out when I try to stand again. They ate in quiet, the cornbread rough but warming. Elijah let the fire die down, then packed the saddle again, careful not to disturb her resting leg. We'll reach Benton by late afternoon, he said, tightening the cinch strap. Ride'll be rough, but the trail evens out after the next ridge. She nodded, gripping his hand as he helped her up into the saddle. What happens after we get there? He hesitated, adjusting the stirrup. That's your call. I didn't ask what I'd do, she said, steady now. I asked you. He looked up at her, the morning light catching in the stubble along his jaw. I hadn't figured that far, but I reckon I wouldn't mind staying a few days, make sure your sister's boy pulls through. She held his gaze. And after that, depends whether I'm wanted there. Her fingers curled over the saddle horn. You might be. They left the camp behind, the trail narrowing beneath the shadow of the pines. The morning passed in steady silence until the trees thinned and the land stretched wide and gold ahead of them. The Missouri glinted below, and the distant roofs of Fort Benton sat against the sky like folded paper. Francesca shifted in the saddle, her voice quiet. When I came west, I thought the hardest part would be the land. The winters, the dry spells, but it's the loneliness that gets in deep. Elijah didn't look back. It does. I told myself I didn't need anyone. That I could manage, you did. But I don't want to anymore. He stopped then, turning to face her. She met his eyes, her hands loose on the reins. I've spent years not asking for anything, she said. Not letting anyone close, but I'd like you to stay. Not just for the boy. The wind moved through the tall grass, the only sound between them. Elijah stepped closer, his voice low. I wasn't looking for a place to land, but I'd stay, Francesca. If you asked me. I just did. He reached up then, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the saddle. She didn't pull away. His touch was warm, certain. They rode the last stretch together without speaking, the road flattening beneath their horses' hooves. The town grew closer with each mile, smoke curling from chimneys, the soft ring of a blacksmith's hammer echoing faintly down the hill. When they reached the edge of Benton, Elijah led the horse to the doctor's porch. A boy no older than 10 burst through the door before they could knock. Aunt Chess, he cried, eyes wide. Francesca dismounted slowly, arms wrapping around him as he flung himself into her waist. His forehead was damp, but the fever was breaking. Elijah stepped back, letting them have the moment. Later, when the doctor had ushered them inside and the boy was resting, Francesca found Elijah on the porch, hat in hand, watching the road. She stepped beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his sleeve against hers. "I don't want you to leave when morning comes," she said. "I won't," he said. "Not unless you ask me to." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then stay. Help me build a life that doesn't feel like just surviving." He looked down at her, and for the first time the weariness in his face softened into something steady. "Something sure." "I will." She leaned into him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. The sun hung low above the town, casting long light across the porches and spires, and for the first time in years both of them stopped looking for the next place to go. They'd found it. Right there, hand in hand, with nothing but days ahead. By the end of the following week, Francesca's leg had begun to carry her weight again, though she still moved with care. She walked with a cane Elijah had carved from a downed ash branch, its grip shaped to her palm. The raw bark had been stripped clean and the wood was burnished smooth, warmed by his hands on the edge of her sister's small property, beyond the vegetable rows and the rail fence. Elijah was splitting firewood. The sound of the axe carried across the yard in steady rhythm, each strike measured. Francesca stood watching from beneath the porch eave, a basket of linens at her side, sunlight stretching over her shoulder. Her nephew's laughter echoed faintly from the back field, where he chased chickens through the grass. "You work like you're fixing to build a house out of that pile," she said as she approached, cane tapping lightly against the packed earth. Elijah paused, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Just keeping your sister warm through the next storm." She tilted her head. "The weather's been clear 3 days running." He leaned the axe against the stump. "Then maybe I'm just buying time." She stepped closer. "Time for what?" He met her eyes. "To ask if you'd want me to stay longer than I first said." She set the basket down. "I thought I already answered that." "I know," he said, his voice lower now, "but I've been thinking about what that means. Not just staying in Benton, staying with you for good." A breeze pulled loose strands of hair across her cheek. She didn't brush them back. "I've lived through enough to know what I don't want," she said. "And I don't want to spend another season wondering what might have been." He took a step forward, hands loose at his sides. "I've got no land, no cattle. Just the tools in my saddlebag and the strength in my arms. I've already got soil that needs turning and a roof that leaks," she said. "What I need is someone who'll stand beside me when the frost comes early and the hens stop laying." He reached for her hand, drawing it to his chest. "I've wandered long enough. If you'll have me, I'll build our days slow and steady. No promises I can't keep," she nodded, her hand still in his. "I've never wanted grand, just honest." They stood a moment longer, the air warm with the scent of lilac from the bush near the porch. Then she leaned in, pressing her forehead to his, her eyes closed. "I want you here," she said. "I'm here," he answered. That night, after supper dishes had been dried and stacked, Francesca and Elijah sat on the porch while her sister tucked the boy in bed. The cane rested beside her chair, untouched. Elijah's arm lay behind her, not possessive, just present. "I'm thinking about tilling more of the south field," she said. "Could put in squash, maybe corn," he nodded. "I'll help you mark the rows." "Got a good eye for spacing." She smiled, chin resting against his shoulder. "You plan to sleep in the loft forever? Didn't figure I'd be welcome in your room just yet." She looked up at him. "You are now." Elijah didn't speak, only brought his forehead to hers again the way she'd done earlier. The porch boards beneath them creaked, and the stars above blinked quietly into place. The next morning, they walked into town together. Francesca wore her Sunday dress, the blue calico one she hadn't touched in over a year. Elijah had cleaned his shirt with river water and borrowed a razor from the doctor. They stood before the justice of the peace with her sister and nephew beside them, the boy gripping Elijah's hand like it had always belonged to him. Their vows were simple. No rings, just words spoken clear and true. Afterward, they returned to the house, where the bread had been baked golden and the neighbor girl had brought over raspberry preserves. They ate on the porch, passing plates and stories, the boy falling asleep with his head on Elijah's knee. That night, with the lamp turned low and the windows open to the sound of wind through the cottonwoods, Francesca slipped her hand into Elijah's beneath the quilt. "I used to think love was something quiet and far away," she said. He traced her knuckles with his thumb. "I used to think it wasn't for men like me. You were wrong," she whispered. "So were you." They slept with their bodies close, their breathing matched, the weight between them no longer from grief or fear, but from the start of something lasting. 2 years later, Francesca's garden stretched clear to the fence line. Elijah had built her a kitchen lean-to with shelves for preserving jars and a side window that looked east, where the morning light hit first. The boy ran trap lines with Elijah and learned to whittle arrow straight sticks, his feet always dusty, his pockets full of pine cones. Every evening, Francesca lit the oil lamp and set 2 plates on the table. Elijah came in smelling of wood smoke and hay, and he always kissed her temple before washing up at the basin. They never talked about the bridge. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already crossed it, and stayed.